And we are live. It's Dr. J in the house with Rob Edwards. Today, we're going to be talking about probiotics, when they make you worse. We try to add a little bit more nuance to these topics. Some of these topics come up again and again. We try to provide some of our clinical expertise, what you can do if this happens with patients or yourself. What does it mean? What do we look for? And we're going to dive into this topic. Rob, welcome to the podcast again, man. How you doing?
Hey, doing good. It's good to be on here again. It's been a while. Been through Christmas, been through Thanksgiving. I don't know whenever we did our last show. It must have been like fall time.
November, I think. I think November, maybe before
Is
Thanksgiving.
it November? Before Thanksgiving. So since then, you kind of know we've been on the road and we do do shows. And so we were doing Merry Christmas, Uncle Scrooge, went across the country, and we finally made our way back here about 2 weeks ago. So
you guys are on tour. That's amazing.
We're on tour. That's right. We're serious about these things now. It was good. It was good though.
There you go. Awesome. All right. Well, let's dive into this topic. I'm always trying to provide nuance based on clinical experience. So we have probiotics, beneficial bacteria. We have the two major strains, which are going to be your bifidobacter, whether it's lactis, longus, subtilis, or I should say, and then you have your acidophilus, your lactobacillus strains, acidophilus, brevii, KCI, paracasei, right? Bifidobacter infantis. So you have your lacto and your bifido strains. There's about 8 to 10 in each category at least, maybe more. And then you're going to have some of your spore-based strains that are going to be like your bacillus, subtilis, coagulans, licheniformis, Clausii. And then you're going to have what we call like beneficial yeast, but they're kind of in that same camp, which are going to be your Saccharomyces boulardii. So your bifido on one side, your lacto, your bacillus or your spore-based, and then your Saccharomyces. Those are your big four kind of lanes that you can go in with probiotics. And the major lane people talk about probiotics are majorly going to be in that bifido lacto kind of strain. That's where you're going to get with a lot of your fermented foods and such, your kefir, your sauerkraut. And these can be very helpful, right? Most people understand probiotics are helpful because antibiotics knock it down. We eat lots of processed sugar. We don't get a lot of fermented foods in our diet like we did from an evolutionary perspective. Like if you read the works of Weston A. Price, fermented food was consumed a lot more frequently. Now it's not. So we know that that's a good thing to have. But with lots of dysbiosis in bad bacteria, previous exposure to antibiotics, it really creates this rebound overgrowth, whether it's from microdoses of Roundup or glyphosate in our food, which is a pesticide that is a kind of patented as an antibiotic originally, whether it's exposure to antibiotics or whether it's a fermentable free diet because we don't eat fermented foods, or just a high processed standard American diet. All these things are going to give us what's called dysbiosis, high bad bacteria in relationship to good bacteria. And we could test it, but this is a common theme. And so it makes sense, hey, let's throw probiotics into the mix. But sometimes it can create negative effects. And we'll dive into that in a minute.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think that's kind of just keeping the basics first, right? You sort of balance within the body, balance within the gut. And, kind of like what Justin was saying is that the die-off, the different things of these things, when they're not able to be balanced or we sort of have a dysbiosis within the gut, we're going to start to have issues that can lead to leaky gut. Of course, once we get the leaky gut, we can have all kinds of symptoms like brain fog or skin issues or, on down the road. And so, yeah, today I'm excited. Let's kind of dive in, like you said, about talking about, what are some of the expectations or how we can kind of tell whenever these probiotics actually aren't working for us.
So first thing is when we take probiotics in, it can disrupt and kind of push out or crowd out dysbiotic bacteria. So the first negative reaction could be a die-off reaction. You see this with lots of bifido, lots of lactobacillus. If you eat too much sauerkraut, too much of a probiotic for the first time, that could push out E. coli. It could push out some of the bad bacteria. So some may not necessarily be a bad thing. Some may be like a cleansing, pushing out and crowding out the ecological niches in the gut of bad bacteria. So we have that component there where we're kind of crowding out the ecological niches. That's why if you're starting on a probiotic for the first time, it's good to just start maybe a bite of sauerkraut or start with one capsule of a probiotic. That's a good thing out of the gate. And when it comes to probiotics, there's professional grade, or where when I go and have my supplier make probiotics, we're buying the highest grade quality. There's going to be tiers in which you can buy raw material. We want the top tier. We want a climate control. We want everything dialed in. We want moisture control. We want to also make sure the CFU, the colony forming units, that's how many beneficial bacteria there. We want to make sure that colony forming unit, that CFU, that number, let's say in mine, it's 25 billion per serving. That number that we give is what's going to be there at expiration. If you go look at a lot of consumer reports, most of the CFUs that you get from junky companies, you're going to see that that CFU is what's there on manufacture date. So professional grades are always going to say CFUs 2 years later. So that means it could be even double at that date. Because there's a little equation they use. Say, okay, if it's this much, we're going to see probably a 50 to 75% reduction over the next 2 years. And so they're going to say we need to double the amount or even higher to ensure that CFU is at that level at expiration. That's number one. And number two, obviously, climate control, making sure all that's dialed in. So when we start on a high quality probiotic, it's good to start very low and slow and work it up. That's number one. And number two, it's good to have prebiotic fiber there because that can help feed the cholanocytes, that can improve the butyrate, that can almost act as fertilizer for that beneficial bacteria to kind of gain a foothold. But it's always good to taper that in with the prebiotic fiber typically last and the probiotics first, but go slow and taper that up gradually.
Yeah, and kind of just some of the reactions that we might have, the Herxheimer reactions from the die-off, like you were talking about a while ago, is you have things like fatigue or bloating or headaches or kind of like flu-like symptoms,
Mm-hmm.
and it lasts a few days, could last weeks, depending on the individual, and depending how much gut imbalance there is. So, I mean, would we want to start considering some binders at that factor, just kind of cut it off and then make a change?
You could. I mean, you are releasing gases. And so when those gases get released, you could take a really good activated charcoal, a really good, citrus kind of pectin or a fulvic mineral or chlorella, something that has the track record to absorb gases. So, first off, taper it up, number one. Two, you can always do a binder way away from it, a couple hours away. That's a good option. Three is you got to look at someone's gut. If they have a lot of dysbiosis already, throwing a lot of bacteria, beneficial bacteria, into that gut when they have a lot of dysbiosis, it's like going into your grass that's full of weeds and throwing a whole bunch of seeds down. It's always good to do some trimming, to do some weeding, right?
Removal.
Before we throw the seeds down. We create more
Yeah.
space for the good stuff to go in. It's easier to put more seeds down and then crowd out the bad, right,
Yeah.
in the future versus put fertilizer and seed down when there's a lot of bad taking up place. Much
Yeah.
better off weeding, getting that space that the bad was taking is now open, and the good seeds can come in and start to gain a foothold. And so we always like to do that. So the second
Mm.
thing is you could have a lot of dysbiosis, and I call it's like creating a feeding frenzy. When you chum the waters and there's no sharks in the water, guess what happens? The water just sits there. Maybe you get some smaller fish coming, but there's no sharks. When the sharks are there, and the waters are chum, the sharks will show up fast, right? They can smell that drop of blood like 3 miles away.
Yeah.
Same thing with gut bacteria. So when we have a lot of gut bacteria and that dysbiosis, that ratio is off against our favor, that can create that feeding frenzy. And that feeding frenzy, as Rob said, could be different gases, hydrogen gases, CO2 gas, methane gas, especially if you have foul smelling kind of flatulence, and that can throw off your motility as well.
Yeah, and then what about like sort of like the gut health? So we might have some like putrefaction, you have some biofilm, other things that it sounds like we need to sort of break through first before we even maybe approach that. But if somebody's taking like a antibiotic, for example, and they're sort of clearing out, or they've kind of cleared out maybe too much and created a really cleared house completely, how do we kind of address that?
Well, when it comes to taking antibiotics, if you have to, if you're in a position where you have to, it's good to take a probiotic. You can do it with it, just don't do it at the same time. Try to take it opposite. So if you're taking a probiotic in the morning and night, try to take one in the afternoon and at dinner time. That's number one. You definitely want to allow the probiotics to overlap after the fact. For at least 1 month after the fact, you want to continue to take it without any bacteria there. So that's also good as well. So we want to make sure, not at the same time, but it's okay to still take it, space it out at least 2 to 4 hours, but then continue to have it go at least 30 days afterwards. So that's key as well. And then there's usually two camps of probiotics, right? There's two people. There's someone who's just coming in that saw a video or has some tummy issues, and it's like, let's just try this thing,
Yep.
and their gut's not in great shape. They don't have their digestion in great shape. They don't have their ability to break food down. They don't have their motility in good shape. They take
Hmm.
it. That can create a whole bunch of gas, whether it's hydrogen or methane. These things can throw off your bowels.
Yep.
Hydrogen's more common to cause diarrhea, methane constipation. So now you have motility issues. Maybe your diet's not great, so you're still eating a lot of bad foods that feed the bad stuff. And these are the people that are most likely to have reactions. I have some patients that we've done a really detailed herbal cleanse. We've really tweaked the diet. We've starved out the bad microbes. We worked on motility and digestion. Well, we add the probiotics in too fast and they have an issue. And that's kind of more of that Herxheimer's kind of pushing the ecological niches, kind of getting that bad stuff out by really overcrowding it and pushing it out in that sense.
Mhm.
And that's where we just really have to go slower and lower. That's really important.
Yeah, and I think kind of like what you're talking about is, it really depends on where a person's starting, right? It's sort of like what's the condition of the gut? What happened, right?
Yes.
Are we coming straight off of antibiotics, or are
How
we
inflamed is it too? What if they're
right?
really jacked up? A lot of calprotectin, a lot of EPX, a lot of inflammation.
Yeah, or like, do we have small intestinal bacterial overgrowth? Like what's going on inside of the gut? Like where are we starting from? Because somebody just comes off of antibiotics, they just cleared out a whole bunch of things versus somebody else got a bunch of buildup right within the gut, and it's not even going to take place anyhow, right? And so I think that that's important, and I like the analogy that you used in sort of like cutting things down, like creating a good platform for probiotics to even be effective in the first place. But if we're just trying to throw probiotics on top of biofilms and growths and other kind of dysbiotic yeast and bacteria, mycotoxins, all those different kind of things. Now we're just kind of adding more, even though it's good. It's just not right. It's not the right time.
Yep, 100%. And also we have histamine, right? So I'm making some couple of notes here on my little checklist to make sure I hit. But histamine's a big deal. Now,
Yeah.
a lot of the probiotics that we use, guess what? Some strains like Paracasei, et cetera, on the lactobacillus side, some bifido strains may produce a little histamine. And so if you haven't addressed the dysbiotic bacteria in the gut, guess what? That can be a big source of a lot of histamine. So if we
Hmm.
have the diet's not dialed in, we're driving inflammation from food that can increase histamine because histamine is an immune response. So inflammation coming in, histamine. We have histamine maybe in the food itself. Think citrus, think aged meats. That's more histamine. And then we have the gut bacteria producing histamine. So now we have three big sources of histamine. And then if you were to add in mold or anything else environmentally, that can be even more. And so that can create more issues, headaches, brain fog, mood issues. And then, of course, you have all the generic digestive stuff, the bloating, the gas, discomfort, all these things. And so we got to make sure that bacteria balance is in the best favor possible where we decrease a lot of that dysbiotic bacteria. And again, I use the word dysbiosis and SIBO interchangeably.
Yeah.
SIBO is just, it's being really specific in where that bacteria imbalance is. It's saying it's in the small intestine, right? SIBO is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Dysbiosis is just talking about the intestinal tract as a whole and
Yeah.
saying, hey, there's more bad stuff than good stuff. Typically, you need like some kind of a breath test to really say, hey, it's SIBO. And so, because we don't have a test, I just use the word dysbiosis. It's just a more general word. And so, a lot of times
Yeah.
we have to bring that bacteria balance back down,
Yeah.
and then probiotics are more receptive. But we also have to ensure that we're digesting food really well because someone who's not breaking down their food, that food's fermenting, it's rancidifying, it's producing lots of different gases. And if you add probiotics and that produce its own set of gas, that could be overwhelming to your system.
Yeah, and I think that could be a little bit of like confusion, right? Is it like, and when we talk about the body, it's less about sort of just trying to get a bunch of good things in it, like that idea. It's more about balance, right? And the body's trying to create homeostasis, and so even though we know probiotics are good, all these things are good, but when it creates too much of something too fast, too quickly, right? Our body can't handle that. It's going to show other signs and symptoms that it's not handling that. And so like you and I were talking before this in terms of like so many people, they hear about supplements or they hear about something they're supposed to do, and so they add a probiotic and it doesn't work, and then they think, well, then it's not a probiotic issue or it's not that issue. And really, you have to do these things in the right order to rebuild the body, and it has to honor like physiology and balance.
Yep. And so we have our low histamine strains, which are our Bifido infantis, our Bifido longum, our Bifido bifidum, our Lactobacillus plantarum, our Lactobacillus or a Saccharomyces boulardii, and our Bifido lactis. Those are our low strains. So if someone's really sensitive, we're going to work them through a protocol and really work on all the gut stuff, the food stuff, the digestion, the motility. We're going to get everything dialed in, but then we may start with those strains if they're really sensitive, or we may start with more spore-based strains in the Bacillus family. And some of the high bacteria strains, the high histamine strains of probiotics are going to be your Lactobacillus casei, your Lactobacillus bulgaris, your Lactobacillus reuteri. And reuteri is great. I mean, that's like really helpful for H. pylori too. So a lot of these strains, we want them to be in there ideally. And so we want to go through the right sequence. So if someone's sensitive, that's where we want to do some testing, make sure there's not a parasite, make sure H. pylori is good, make sure everything's dialed in. So L. reuteri or Lactobacillus reuteri, Lactobacillus helivictus, and Streptothermophilus. That's the only one that's kind of not in that lactobifido family. So those are the biggies out of the gate. So you have your low histamine species and then your high. So that kind of gives you an idea. And if someone's really sensitive, we can focus more on spore and more on
Mhm.
low histamine. But I find personally with my probioflora line that I formulated, that's very, broad spectrum on both the bifido and lacto sides. Most patients, even sensitive ones, can handle it. We just go really low and slow and taper it up. And we may even have them on a lower FODMAP diet while we do that. And I find also just cooking the foods better can help because the less fiber there is, cooking that fiber down can make it a lot easier to handle when it's in your tummy.
Yeah, that's really good. Now, in terms of like, the less histamine, the more histamine, like depending what strains we're choosing to use. I mean, is there any benefit, like in your opinion, to utilize like DAO and things like that to sort of break down histamines while they're taking it, concurrently? Because I do a little bit of that.
Oh yeah, 100. That's a great question. I would say definitely adding in DAO, which comes from porcine glandular kidney glandular. So you can do that. Making sure all the nutrients for DAO are there, like your vitamin C, your B6, making sure all the nutrients to make it is there. And then with females, a lot of times they can be very histamine sensitive when progesterone's low and they're more estrogen dominant. And so making sure that's dialed in. So if there's estrogen dominance or low progesterone because of stress, that could be a thing. And then also, I would say if there's a lot of histamine in their environment, allergens, maybe it's that time of year, a lot of allergens, maybe they need an air filter, get their nose flushed out with saline or Xlear can be helpful. Running a mold plate test on their home, make sure there's not a bunch of mold or mycotoxins because that could fill up that histamine bucket too, and that can make them more reactive in their gut. And there could also be colonized mold, and we'll typically see that on an
Yeah.
organic acid test. We'll see those are the orange markers on the organics between markers 1 and 9. You'll see like Aspergillus, Fusarium, different families of mycotoxins could be colonized in the gut too.
Yeah. No, that's well said. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of an amazing thing because the interesting thing about the gut, like, is it has so many interrelations to the body because of course you have the gut. Underneath the gut, we have the immune system, and underneath the immune system, we have the blood, right, in our bloodstream. And so that's why it's a lot of people think I have a gut issue when they feel something in their gut, but in reality, functional medicine has talked about this for a long time. All these other peripheral symptoms, brain fog, skin issues, right? All these other things can be a part of it, and even kind of getting back to like choosing the wrong probiotic can exacerbate those things as well. So sometimes it's not just looking at like how's my gut feeling whenever I'm taking a probiotic, but how are my other symptoms that I have going on doing?
100%. Yep. Someone came in and talked about a raw diet for better gut health. For the most part, a raw diet is actually going to make your tummy worse. The only exception is if your diet is worse because you're just eating lots of processed sugar, lots of alcohol, lots of refined processed stuff, and you're not eating really much whole foods, that may help. But if you're already eating pretty well and your gut's pretty jacked up, a lot of times fiber is going to make it worse. That's why cooking food and decreasing the amount of fiber, making it more absorbable, getting the enzymes and the acids to break it down tends to really, really move the needle on that. So in regards to that, what are the big things we want to work on if we have issues with probiotic sensitivity? The first thing is get the food right. Biggest source of, let's say, antibiotic exposure is going to come from glyphosate slash
Mm.
Roundup and residue in our conventional food. Second is going to be just getting exposed to antibiotics. And again, Roundup and glyphosate's more insidious, right? Because if you're eating non-organic food daily, that could be a homeopathic dose that just accumulates over time.
Yeah, you
Then you
just
add
don't
in
know.
lots of processed sugar and gluten and grains, and that adds it, makes it worse, right? And then, of course, you take antibiotics every time you're sick. That
Yeah.
makes it even worse. And let's say you're not coming in with probiotics during it or after, then that can make it even worse. And again, probiotics don't live in your gut forever, probably about 4 weeks. And so it's good that you're on a probiotic, every now and then, at least every month to 2 months, or try to get more fermented foods in your diet on the regular. For me, that may be a ginger kombucha, and maybe some sauerkraut, and maybe some Bubby's pickles, and maybe even just some coconut kefir. So figure out what works for you. And so on that. But and then also get your food digesting better. Because if you're not breaking down your food, you can get a lot of fermentation and a lot of bloat from just indigestion. That's right. People have lactose intolerance. That means they cannot break down the lactose sugar.
Mhm.
Anything you have a hard time breaking down, you're going to be intolerant in a way where you have gas and bloat and maybe even brain fog or motility issues because of it. So you want to make sure that's dialed in. Next, get your gut tested if this issue is more chronic. You want to look under the hood, see if you have other infections,
Yep.
see if you have other high, because I see patients that are like, they have 1,000x, 100x in regards to dysbiotic bacteria levels of Pseudomonas or Klebsiella or Morganella or Proteus. And you're probably not going to be able to eat your way out of that. If you have a very low level of increases, you could probably get away with diet and good
Yeah.
supplementation there. But if you have higher levels, you're probably going to have to get that treated at a much higher therapeutic level. And then, of course, next after that is just work with a practitioner where you can titrate things up slow. That can be very helpful too, just going slower because you can have a die off reaction from just going too fast as well.
Yeah, and that just puts more stress on the body, more symptoms, more issues that are
Bingo.
downstream from that. So yeah, I think timing is key because a lot of people want to get better, like tomorrow. And the reality is we don't get sick overnight. So it takes time. It takes a certain kind of order. And even, discerning what that order should be sometimes clinically, you have to track it. You have to try to understand what your body's doing, how it's reacting to things, how it's not reacting to things, and really not get discouraged when something doesn't work, because that's the whole thing. I think a lot of people do think that probiotics is the magic ticket, and they take it and things get worse and they feel like, oh well, then I guess there's nothing that I can do. That's absolutely not true. You got to start first understanding what is the condition of your gut, and then we start building off of that. And I think that's one of the biggest points, I think, Justin, that you're making is you got to determine where we're starting, how the body's going to react to this thing, and then we sort of get a better picture in terms of like where we need to actually start with somebody.
Yep, exactly. Someone wrote in the chat, I'll kind of add it too. They talked about Akkermansia. Now,
Yeah,
Akkermansia is not necessarily, it's kind of more in that commensal bacteria family. It's not in the kind of probiotic family, the
that's
beneficial
bad.
bacteria,
Yeah,
but it has all kinds of other benefits, right? Akkermansia mucinophilia, it lives in the mucosal lining. So it does a couple of things. It produces mucus or mucin, so it helps with gut barrier integrity. So it strengthens the mucosal layer, reduces gut permeability, helps with metabolic health, so helps with inflammation, and also improves blood sugar. I've seen patients take it and see their blood sugar coming down better, more efficiently after a meal. It's very anti-inflammatory, and it does help improve microbial imbalances. And so I'll run gut tests, and if I see Akkermansia less than DL, we're going to use some Akkermansia supplementally. Now we can add it with food. It's not empty stomach bacteria, but we could add it with food. And it does help with those things. So if someone has a history of, let's say, gastritis, atrophic gastritis, gut lining sensitivity, it's going to be helpful to kind of strengthen that mucosal barrier and that lining. So that can be very helpful. Again, not as mainstream. It's really only been available maybe the last 2 to 3 years supplementally. So it's relatively new,
mhm.
but it's very, very promising. I don't put it in the probiotic camp, but I think it's contextually people may confuse it as. And so we might as well throw it into this podcast and know that, yes, it's beneficial. It's good to add it in. If we see it on a stool test where it's less than DL or very low in the red, we're definitely going to add it in with our prebiotic phase, pre/probiotic phase.
Yeah, and I think it's important to kind of mention too again the balance there, because like Akkermansia, I mean, it's like you can also go too high with commensal bacteria as well, or good
Yep.
bacteria.
Yep.
And so
Yeah.
again, it's kind of creating a balance there. And I don't know, practice wise, like have you seen sort of before and after in terms of the GI map, very low or undetectable
On the
to
Akkermansia, yeah, all the time. I've seen it less than DL. Also, people with carnivore, I've seen the bacteroides and firmicutes just totally drop all the way down. Now, I tell patients if it's down low, just try adding in some low FODMAP fiber in, low
yeah,
FODMAP cooked vegetables. It could be, half a serving of sweet potato. It could be a little bit of like cooled potato that's been already cooled that has resistant starch qualities in it. It could be some low FODMAP veggies, whether it's kale or steamed spinach, right? Start with some, low sugar fruit. Think raspberries, right? Think blueberries. Those are good options to start with. See how you do. If you're bloated, or gassy, or you're getting a lot of autoimmune achiness, then just go slow with that. We may need to be more carnivore longer, or maybe you're just hypersensitive to the anti-nutrients in plants and there's more of an autoimmune component. But either way, if you are carnivore, that can definitely impact your gut bacteria. Now, again, you have to look at it and say, does the inflammation of adding healthy low FODMAP anti-inflammatory veggies outweigh the benefit of you just eating carnivore alone? So that's where a clinician has to sit there and weigh it out for you and look at it, because there's a lot of benefits, I think, of having some of these healthy veggies in there. I mean, you can combat some of it if you're adding in more organ meats, but
yeah.
you really want to weigh that out and look at the data and see how sensitive you are.
Yeah, I think well said. I mean, everybody's different. Everybody's kind of structure in their bodies a little bit different and reacts differently. And And there's so many things. I mean, biochemistry is such a broad field, and there's so many different things happening inside the body. But it's like, I love this conversation primarily because I think a lot of people, like I was saying before, just kind of feel like I can add a probiotic, I'm going to get better, and it doesn't happen, and they feel sort of discouraged. And so,
Yep.
really, end of the day, meeting up with a good practitioner, like taking your time, being patient with yourself, and working this stuff out.
100%. And then again, when you look at, gut bacteria, there's so many other things the gut can be impacted because 80% of the immune system's in the gut. And so when you have bacterial imbalances, that's going to influence your immune response, and that could potentially compromise you to many other conditions, could weaken your immune system, could create brain fog issues, because so much of what we see with gut, we just associate, oh, if I have gut issues, it's going to be bloating, gas, diarrhea, constipation, motility issues. But no, it could
Yeah.
be fatigue, anxiety, depression, brain fog, memory issues, right? There's a reason why Michael Gershon wrote the book, The Second Brain, in the late 90s, right? We know the gut has a major brain mood connection. And so if you have mood issues and you don't have the conventional gut things going on, there could still be something there. And you'd want to work with your functional medicine provider to at least cross it off your list and make sure it's dialed in. And just remember, cooking is pre-digestion. So if your gut already stinks in regards to digestion, pre-digesting things more allows your body to get access to those nutrients without the additional stress.
Yeah, love it. Love
That's
it,
why
man.
elemental diets work to some degree, because it's allowing the nutrients to come in without all the digestion or the fiber. And so there is some benefit there. And we've got to plug that in. It can be helpful. But in the end, it's not a diet you want to be on forever, but it has a place, and it's an important tool in the functional medicine provider's toolbox.
Yeah, and I think just a small little pinch there is that, when you talk about digestion, always have to bring up the fact that chewing better will
Oh, dude, hit
actually
it.
go a
Hit
long
it.
way for people, and a lot of people kind of dismiss that and say, "Oh, it's not a big deal," but it's our foods have to be broken down into smaller units and smaller units and smaller units, and so the more we can kind of give a head start on that. That's why we have teeth and everything else, and we chew that stuff down. It gets into our gut, into our stomach, and our stomach acids go to work, and all of this stuff has to become bioavailable, right, to our cells.
110%. Chew your food to at least a oatmeal or kind of white rice consistency. Usually you get about 32 teeth, so 32 chews per bite of food is about reasonable. You don't have to count it, just get used to what that consistency feels like. And then
Yeah.
when you feel it, then you can swallow. And again, try to be avoiding a whole bunch of hydration when you eat. A couple ounces to get some pills down is fine, supplement wise. But 5-10 minutes before a meal, maybe 15, and then an hour and a half to 2 hours afterwards is pretty good. And again, the healthier your gut is, you can get away with cheating on that. But the more dysfunctional it is, the more symptoms you have, the more bloating and gas and diarrhea, and the more you got to be on top of that. But good point on that, Rob. Those are the foundational things. People ignore it and they forget about it, but they can move mountains for sure.
Yeah, it's sort of like playing basketball, right? You never go into practice without warming up.
Yep.
It's just that dribble, dribble, dribble. It's the same kind of thing, is keeping the basics here. And so
I
it,
love it.
it does wonders.
Well, guys, Rob sees patients worldwide as well over at Heritage Health, heritagehealth.life.life. We'll put his link down below. Feel free and check Rob out. He sees patients worldwide. If you want to support, he is there for you. And I'm Dr. J, justinhealth.com. Put a link down below. You can reach out to me and my staff. We see patients worldwide, and we do testing, and we practice all of the principles that we chat about here and more. And again, we want to individualize the treatment. There's a lot of people that have a lot of just broad spectrum programs out there. We want to individualize it for you, and we want to essentially test, not guess. That's how we're going to be really specific compared to just getting you on a general protocol. We want to really get it dialed in for you. Rob, anything else for listeners?
Well, that's it. I just love Louisa. She just kind of mentioned she's going to chew her food better. That's her number one New Year's resolution. And so, no,
Oh,
doing
yeah.
good. Doing good. I love doing these things. I actually, my next desire, I'm going to tell you, I was going to tell you offline, but I want to go over some of that EOE stuff in one of our talks. Trouble swallowing and things like that. I feel like a lot more people are starting to have those issues, and that's sort of for next time. But just putting that,
Yeah, we'll save it. Again, when you have intestinal inflammation, you're right. It really starts in the mouth all the way to the anus, right? And so anywhere along the way can be impacted for sure. So
there you go.
good points, guys. All right, appreciate it. Put your comments below. Love to see it, and we'll answer them. Have a great one, guys. Take care, y'all.